not sure how long it's going to hold. Warning lights everywhere. Abort! We've lost Tom. Look out. It's out of control.
Good evening, folks. This is your Ox right here with the date. Here we are, and coming for that magic time, 11:11, but it's now 11:05 p.m. today, March 20th, 2022. And I'm just going to start my stream a little quicker. This morning we did try to do a broadcast, and of course the sound was horrible. So I had to do a little remix, and of course I'm reintroducing myself into this whole medium because, hey, we need folks to do that. So on with the show. If you ever want to buy me that coffee, I'm also on Reddit as Conscious King. I didn't pick that name, but that's the name that came up. I'm also on BitChute. One of the better sites I like these days is known as Blackenough as it's spelled. And also it's very user-friendly. I love the design. And yeah, there's so much more than just what meets the eye out there when it comes to going on and making a lot happen with social media among us. I'm on Gab. Gab is a very nice also, sort of like a different-ish, Facebookish type of site with a little bit more option for color, but this is very nice also. And a lot of these you can also feel free more to express yourself, right? And blog and write and get alternative news, which is very a little difficult to get these days. I wouldn't say very hard, but you have to really search and look. Bantube, brilliant, one of the most brilliant uh, pro melanin web video websites that's out there also. I'm on that. You can definitely take a look and join in. I mean, this is like the black tube, if we're gonna call it that, right? With a lot of our kings and queens putting out posts out there, as you can see. And Dwayne here has a great show that I'm sure some of us have seen on YouTube. And this is where I got hooked on. So thank you very much, sir. And also Odyssey. Odyssey is like another alternative where, once again, God bless the medium of what's out there that we see. But now we have with the Google companies of Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, but it's also good to get some alternatives, right? So a lot of people will lose posts, or some folks will lose or get banned from their social media, and sometimes it's the popular ones too, right? But they have to do what they do because they've been around for a long time. So I don't see anything particularly wrong, since that is the case with getting involved with other websites, right? So that's something to know. So you have a whole series of other type of videos. Some people can say it's sort of conspiracy type of sites, but I mean, same could be said for the legacies, right? What's to say that they are not the way they've been going, anyways, right? On the ground is a on the ground show. Is another great site that you can go check out and listen to shows of stuff that's going on that's close to home, right? Because it kind of sucks to get only one opinion and one narrative all the time, right? So on the ground is one site you want to check out. And we have, as we can say, if there is a black Twitter, Melanin People is one of them. This is a new site that, if I'm understanding, just came out recently. So it might be something that, if you're looking to check out, as you see here. And look, a very nice design also. So Melanin People is another one to check out if you have an interest on them. But a lot of them, can only last and stick around with you, right? With you, the consumer. And we do make up, and I'm talking melanated people here, we make up quite a bit of the consumer base, right? When it comes to purchasing and whatnot. So over here we have social media app for the Black community. There's another one, Afrotech, right? So this is created by Adiyinka Adigoke. Melanin People is a social networking app designed to connect a range of Black and Brown individuals, business and professionals. So that's pretty cool, right? And let's see here. If there's if the link is up, courtesy of Black News, of course. So Melanin People, I am a member, and it's probably one of the better, you know, outside of the box sites that you can go, right? And there you go. So I got my account, and this is who made it. And let's see, if you're looking for the best African American history apps and websites, it's good to know African Americans are central to US history and responsible for much of what we consider American culture. The apps, games, websites collected here tell that story, balancing the triumphs of African Americans in politics, literature, music, science, and beyond. With the continued struggle for social justice, use these picks to break free of the boundaries of Black History Month, right? Because it should be Black futures, enough of the past in this sense, unless it's progressive and it helps, and integrate African American history all year long across the curriculum. And we're going to look into that, with what that whole curriculum is, because right now we see in the news they're trying to ban 11/11. Here we go. Make a wish, 11:11 p.m. on March 20th, 2022. Make your wish now. Great, isn't it? So now that you're making your wish, now we can actually see and enjoy the future. All right, so let's go on here. And as we see, Truso, a Black-owned social networking app set to launch. So Truso, it could also be called the Black Twitter experience, and allow African Americans their own social media platform, backed by celebrities Sway Calloway, Kareem Grimes, Terrell Owens, and Nikki Barber. The Black-owned social networking app, Truso. So this is it. Let's see. Is it out? Do we have it here? Oh, there it is. So this is coming. So yeah, this is actually a fund. They're raising the funds to actually get this on the go. So I think that's pretty cool. I'd say that's pretty awesome. If we can invest, and right now they've gotten this much raised, and it's not much actually. 195 per share, minimum investment. Yeah, it's pretty good. 11 days left. So I would, if you're looking to invest, maybe this is the one. Truso is a true social network based on video. It's virtual extension of the barbershop, beauty shop, and other real communities where real conversations happen. So this is interesting. So once again, as we see, we do make up a very big chunk of that demographic when it comes to the sales. If you're looking for online and print directory for minority-owned businesses, BPI, Black Pages International, is probably one of the top one, and a place to go to, right? It was founded over 20 years ago by the legendary Arnett D. French, founder and first president of the National Association of Black Pages, NABP. So if you definitely want to look out for other businesses, because right now, hey, it's very contemptuous out there. We see, we know, we feel what's going on. And not that we're just saying we're tired, we're saying we have to make moves besides actually just complain. So possibly part of that would be steering and supporting the businesses of the people that represent you, right? Everybody else does it, and even every other culture does it. So there's nothing wrong. And don't let anyone tell you different, that, oh, well, you can't include us and this and that. No, the only reason why we should consider that, we should support more of our own websites and own brands, is because, well, look at the history. The history tells us also way back all the patents that were stolen from the folks who made a lot of the inventions and a lot of conveniences that we have today, right? So if everyone's kind of uncertain, and this is part of what this whole blog is about. If everyone's uncertain and fearful that, well, the quality of what we make and we've got to get out of that mindset. It's not going to be easy because face it, when we grew up, there's a few things to know. After the Second World War, education wasn't something that was freely just given to anybody, really. This is well, as much as even when I was born, right? The education, I would say the quality and peak of it, because of the generation that was still young then, which was the boomers, was solid. But then after that, like the boomers got woke, as we could say it, and went back to sleep, and education went out the window. So literacy is very challenged, and it's been challenged since the late 80s. And one of the reasons why, even on why I do these type of posts, is it's for the folks out there who maybe are incarcerated, right? That unfortunate young man out there who doesn't have a chance to hear or know where to go or where to connect, right? We need to represent, and we need to have also courage to do that. Because at least 60 years ago, right? It was really hands on. We didn't have what we have today, which is the social media, the glitz, the glamour. Even then, we know that when you have all of that, you've got no power. You never had power unless media tells you. So, as we see here in Marketing Resource Solutions, African Americans and social media, in our previous post, yeah, they were discussing this. And this is a very good site to check out, right? Because according to Nielsen and the National Newspaper Publishers Association, African Americans are 44% more likely than total market consumers to create a social media profile. Okay, so that's resilient, receptive, and relevant African consumer 2013. Overall, 73% of African American internet users and 96% of those ages 18 to 29 use a social networking site of some kind, right? So that's the Pew. The usage of social media sites such as Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook to reach African Americans has been proven to increase consumer engagement, as 81% of African Americans are more likely to show support of a company via social media. So there you go. It tells you, right? At the same time, though, we're talking about supporting business. So if education wasn't really the biggest thing up until even the Second World War, what were people doing? Well, businesses were hands-on. It's what became, or what we ended up calling, blue collar, right? The person who's able to fix that toilet, that person who can, bring you a fridge, build you a home, build you a house, landscape, right? And on and on and on and on and on. So this is something also that we have to start considering as a people, right? Because it seems, you can see, and I like to say that all the other cultures in the world that we see in the planet right now, this planet, don't behave and carry on the way we do. At the same time, the geniuses that come up from our community are never, um, how shall I say, used to its fullest potential. By then, it's usually exploited or sold out, right? So it's just very interesting. So, and this is in light of what we're seeing, right? Because we're seeing a lot of the legacy of the industry, and it's big, right? It's not just it's big. It's everything. How we see when you walk out in the street, what picture, what poster you see. Approximately 27% of African Americans are active Twitter users, and 38% are active Instagram. Now, I don't use Instagram a lot, to be honest with you. I was really a more, old school, the good old FB page, YouTube, and I was into the link. And once again, there's so many. And one thing I did notice is that the folks that end up subscribing are not necessarily. I would suspect there are a lot of bots out there, right? And of course that doesn't help, because a lot of bots could, whether they used to call them Russian bots or American bots, right? A lot of these bots and so-called troll bots don't have any good intention, right? Especially when you want to try and get get the truth and get to the facts. So alternatives are going to be needed. And yes, we're gonna have to have like some bro hackers, and they're out there. It's just that we never hear about them, right? But we need to get those resources in going. And once again, those resources that we have shouldn't only be about, the star and put all that speculative, like, oh, you're going to be a millionaire. It should be also promoting more concrete, sustainable, much needed amenities and of course, trades, right? Because when I grew up, I studied into the communications and whatnot. And yeah, so much for that. And all of us who have so much for it, because it's always the selected few, and that's a whole other rabbit hole. But let's see here. Let's continue on this article. I digress. So, Pew Research Center's Internet Project, September Combined Omnibus Survey, September 11th, 14th, 2014. And this is, of course, in 2014. So it's just about a decade ago. So you can imagine today, right? Digital campaigns are key for engaging these markets and must be tailored authentically for consumer engagement and loyalty using QR codes, right? So, for instance, 30% of African American millennials get news and information from YouTube, and 45% of African American millennials get their news and information from Instagram. Knowing who and where your market is digitally will produce the highest return on investment, conversion rates, and overall traffic. American Press Institute. So they're telling you, right? But we don't pick up on that. So while even myself, I've been out of the loop for a while in the arts and the internet of things, the art of the Internet of Things. I'm reintroducing myself to at least do some justice of what many of us, once again, are disenfranchised by. And and since we're so disenfranchised by it, I want to talk about courage. You see, back even up until I would say even the early 70s, that's before everything got busted up and broken down, we had more courage than we have today. I hate to say it, but God forbid anything really goes down. Even though we have some strong military and all that, there have been so many changes, even in the physicality of the war games and the people getting, putting their lives at risk out there. But overall, the community at large, the people, the status quo, we've really softened up. We would never be ready for anything. We've seen, like the last big together we had was Occupy, and that didn't go so well. They got boxed in, only to end up suing the government. But that's another story, right? Or even let's say like the Black Lives Matters, right? That too, even though it was able to bring us together, we got bamboozled, right? And since the beginning, even though folks are telling us Uncle George owns it, right? And Uncle Klaus and Uncle Bill and all of them, right? Even though we didn't, we still went out there and got together. So it does show that it can work. We can build and we can get, if we have the courage, and it takes courageous people to do that without being infiltrated, right? So when we talk about Malcolm X, and I hear about people even today using quotes about Malcolm X, or as we see recently, quotes about Martin Luther King having a dream, that shit's been hijacked, bro. If you can't see that, then once again, and this is the thing, responsibility that came with boomers and Gen Xers. We got very comfortable because up until the 60s, man, people were fighting physically, getting punched down, beat down. It was real. Even when I was a kid, it was like today. It's probably worse, and it's probably the same. It's all one and the same. However, today it seems like laws, legal legal jumbo is making it difficult to defend yourself. And that's been going on for a long time, right? The law is, if somebody, let's say, wants to punch you in the arm and hurt your arm, right? And you don't know this person and it really hurts, you can't really, at least in Canada, you can't, it's not in your favor to smash the person out, like knock them out cold. Because then, and once again, it's kind of a wild example here. But let's say the person like really like, okay, took a stick to your arm, right? It's really that kind of thing. There used to be a time when, even before we got into the weapons industry, that there was such a thing as a fist fight, right? a regular punch, I'll beat, and eventually we got into the kicking and the karate and then all that happened in through the 70s and now the guns. That totally overrode anything. So if anything, we're probably more, and even then not equipped to work with those type of tools. Because we see people, even though they have so many arms and it's everywhere, at the end of the day, it's still cowardly, right? You're still not able to put up your dukes. You're still not able to critically think. And temperament. Temperament has gone out the window if you're not able to critically think, right? So that's just a shout out to the folks who still want to fight. And when I say fight, not physically fight, but at least get some type of activism going because we're in for some times where it's going to be challenging and we can't afford to have just people. We're going to even look into a bit, just tell us what to believe, right? A man who stands for nothing will fall for anything. Education is the passport to the future, but tomorrow belongs to those who prepared for it today. If you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppression, right? So this is what we call courage. Because not too long, even though it's risky to your life and all of that, right? Because it knocked him off, it knocked Martin Luther King off. Anytime somebody comes out and tries to do it, if you can't see it already, and if you don't know it, you see it in movies, for God's sakes, then can we not do something? So that's what we're going on tonight, right? Because back then, once again, another hero, Marsha P. Johnson. A lot of folks like to hijack these things, like we say Black Lives Matter, LGBTQ, and I. But the I started with a lot of the melanated people, right? Like Marsha P. Johnson. You could look it up. August 24th, 45, a boomer, passed away in July 6, 92. Born and also known as Malcolm Michaels Jr., was an American gay liberation activist. So this was actually an activist movement that people have to go and do something and move, but that was one generation after the war. So by the time we come in the world, or the expert, yeah, the more so the YZs and the X's, but I was involved with the active movement because of the HIV. Uh, at that time was the pandemic, and they were saying you couldn't literally touch people, you couldn't even, and be careful with black people. That was crazy stuff, right? So that's why even today I can come around and say, I've seen certain things transpire before, right? But there was fight. So I was one of those kids who had to fight because I had friends, and thank God I was safe, and I practiced what we call the safe methods of not contracting what was going around then. But hey, people were getting beat up even if you were black, gay, drag queen, all of that. It was still happening. But we still had to have some fight. In fact, Montreal, they had to have a certain protest that ended up changing the laws, right? A bit. You can look that up, but I don't want to divert too far. So, known as an outspoken advocate for gay rights, Johnson was one of the prominent figures in the Stonewall Uprising of 1969. And of course, though some have mistakenly credited Johnson for starting the riots, which probably so, because hey, it wasn't like any bro or any sister had any rights. We always underestimate. I would say the 80s and Michael Jackson and that whole era, that was the sweet spot. But more on that another time. But when that happened, that's when we fell asleep, right? Because we were the prime pickings, and the boomers by then, hey, they were already taking and reaping the benefits. Johnson was a founding member of the Gay Liberation Front. They'll never tell you that. Was the name of a number of gay liberation groups, the first of which was formed in New York City in 1969. Immediately after the storm, like right away. You get to jail, you get beat down, you come back, boom, Liberation Front. And co-founded with radical activists, of course they called it radical activists, Street Transvestite Action Revolutionaries, STAR. Boom. So for all of these young people out there who are talking about, what it is to be and what gender is about and all that, You should get schooled. STAR was a gay, gender non-conforming, and transvestite street activist organization. Notice, gender non-conforming and trans. So you know what I'm saying? But we got bamboozled, especially I would say in 2010. That's when when Obama was around, right? I think everybody now could say that's when all of this, the Pandora box of what was more, and in some sense, even on a sinister angle, what movements are becoming everywhere, like Black Lives Matter, right? They don't really care. They're just like dummy fringes, like, but they're not like the 60s. So a gay, gender non-conforming and transvestite street activist organization founded in 1970 by Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson, right? And she too was very famous. She passed away recently also. So Sylvia, this is her right here. American liberation, gay liberation and transgender rights. You see how they can actually, even back then, the language was even split up to say, hey, you could be who you are, but this and that. And even then, there ain't no black or no white in that. Notice, right? They took that on, but they were still all together, right? So transgender rights activist who was also a noted community worker in New York. Rivera, who identified as a drag queen, participated in the demonstration. So yeah, there's actually footage of her in like 1969, man. In a jumpsuit, tight jumpsuit there. So I'm saying this to say that like today we have this sort of left literate, upscale elite. We've seen this is what's gonna happen. But this was around for a while. In the 80s, we used to call them like the dynasty people, if you remember that show, the rich and famous lifestyle. Well, these are their freaking grandkids. And this is what's up. So the history was dumbed down forever, ever, right? And just to wrap up here. So, yeah, so Johnson was a founding member of the Gay Liberation Front with Sylvia Rivera, popular figure in New York City gay and art scene, modeling for Andy Warhol. Remember them? Yeah. And Malcolm McLaren and Basquiat, and performing on stage with the drag performance troupe Hot Peaches. Right? Pretty cool. Johnson was known as the mayor of Christopher Street, which is a very well-known area, right? Due to be to being a welcoming presence in the streets of Greenwich Village from 87 to 92, right? But look how this angel ended up. I call them transangelic. Hashtag transangelic. Shortly after 1992 Gay Pride Parade, Johnson's body was discovered floating in the Hudson River. Police initially ruled the death a suicide, but Johnson's friends and other members of the local community insisted Johnson was not suicidal and noted that the back of Johnson's head had a massive wound. So there you go. And this occurred during a time, like I was saying, it was everywhere. I remember back in Montreal, and it was pretty like there was a move, like there was some hostilities going on. And this was at the near, even more so the end of the 80s, like the 90s, right? Just when the whole HIV issue, it was still fresh, but it seemed to have, dwindled down. Definitely by 2000, people were not talking about it anymore, right? And then you had, I believe, doctors and scientists that brought in all kinds of medication. I even had the friends I knew back then, and you know what? I'll tell you something. You would think it was black and all that. I knew one person, and this was a blonde hair, blue eyed white female. Come from a well off family. Rest her soul was one of my good friends. I was 16, 15, 16, but we went to university and we grew up together. And so just around that time, it was 90, what, 95? I found out she had passed away. We even hung out, just but I knew people grow apart. But we did hang out sometimes, have a few beers at Peel Pub or something, and she would say, "Hey, you should go and finish up your degree in communication." She tried to help me get in university and all that. And next thing you know, I hear she passed away. Why? Once she had gone on a vacation, and when she came back, she was assaulted and apparently had contracted HIV. Now, no one knew this, but it turns out at the same time, I guess the depression of what it was, because back then, the medications you had to take was about what, 20? I can't even remember the count, but it was something like, I remember I saw bottles and I was like, how can you take like what, 100 pills? To what? Wow. And this is, of course, before, like, just when they came up with the AZT. That's why today they say, well, they make, there is something that, let's say, if somebody has the infection, they could still, they can't transmit it. But anyway, I'm just saying that's how intense it was. And you couldn't, and so in the 90s, you had this. So there was, so this occurred, a lot of this stuff was going on when anti LGBT violence was at a peak in New York City, including biased crime by law enforcement, right? And they were, and she was, of course, drawing attention to it. Johnson had been speaking out against the dirty cops and elements of organized crime that many believe responsible for some of these assaults and murders, right? So rest her soul, right? And I guess there was some resolution, but not more than that. So this part is just in shout out to the people who had courage, right? Doesn't matter where you come from, just know that if you're one people, and if we can actually handle the fact that as a one people, we do come from the same roots, then we're good. If we can't handle that, we're in trouble. So, anti-critical race theory bill signed into law by Mississippi governor, and similar Republican-led bills have been published in 41 states. So, I find this interesting because I hear a lot of people in the states. I'm in Canada here. I hear a lot of folks say, "Oh, the left are sinister, evil, this, that, right?" Okay. Then you have the right, and they push this shit, right? And then now we hear folks saying, well, maybe they should get back to, to the right, because the right might care more about black people than the left. However, I wonder, I beg, like, who's got your back? So Mississippi Governor Kate Reeves signed into law Monday, that was last week, banning critical race theory and limiting education on race in schools. So what are you going to learn if you have to learn something about history? Senate Bill 2113, critical race theory prohibit, does not mention critical race theory by name except for in its title. So critical race theory is a discipline taught in higher education that analyzes how racism shaped US laws and how those laws continue to impact the lives of non-white people. So the bill says that no public educational institution shall teach that any sex, race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin is inherently superior or inferior, or that individuals should be adversely treated on the basis of their sex, race, ethnicity, religion, or national origin. So, in essence, they don't want their kids to be hurt, right? He says that students are being taught progressive ideals that are against the principles of America's founding. I don't know about that. If you consider how America was founded, how are you gonna like twist that? But once again, everything in this world is a kind of upside down, right? So like we saw the 60s, you had the, now today it's the 2020s, and so you're still fighting, but that's been hijacked, or we've been bamboozled into the hijack, right? Unbiased education. But you see, that's the hypocrisy of it. They can say, "Hey, we can continue the way we are," even though the history says that we've burned down your towns and all of that. How are you gonna? You can't make that erase. You can't erase that. At least not before God's eyes, right? So I guess this is part of the big picture, right? Because everybody's got to be accountable. So maybe there's a lot of souls out there that are still waiting for that day since those days. The whole situation of it is based on the founding of this country and some of the precepts that we, as a country, implicitly or explicitly accepted, chief among which we justified slavery. because powers that be judged black people to be racially inferior. So Democratic State Senator John Horne said, he added a lot of our laws, a lot of our systems, a lot of our customs, a lot of our practices have been impacted by that. Supporters of the bill say their constituents don't want this theory taught to their children. Systematic racism should not be taught to our children, the bill sponsor, right? So you shouldn't teach systematic racism, which means maybe you want to keep it around. Who's got the courage to say anything? Nobody. I mean, if this was another culture, let's just say, if we went for anti, they don't want to teach, and I believe this, they're going for that too. Don't think just because anything that happens to black people doesn't mean it won't happen to, eventually come into anybody else. So whether you're in the Middle East or if you're Jewish, don't think it's not, because I know, and I'm going to give a shout out to the Jews out there who are real, like with the people, who know what time it is. I believe we don't give enough big up and enough props to those folks out there who are not down with any of this right wing stuff, right? And of course, once again, it's going to take courage from those folks, and they actually do have courage. We just don't hear about it. We don't hear about the parties, political parties, actually, even out in Israel, that are not down with certain Z movements and all of that stuff. And they cool knowing that they got melanin roots. And there are rabbis too, woke rabbis who are down with that. But they know too that it's it'll come around because there are believers, right, who are saying, yeah, they know the book, they know the Bible, they know the Torah in such a way that they know that it's not all what it became to be or whatnot, right? That's once again, you got to look up your history deep into that. But no other, but we could not either way have a bill, or those guys could not dare pull out a bill and said, let's make an anti uh, or maybe a pro-Semitic bill, you know, a teaching, uh, not teaching anti-Semitic and not teaching about the Holocaust, right? And not teaching the facts. The same thing for, oh, sorry, I just dropped my mic. The same thing for, I guess, the type of education we can even get in like a school, in elementary school, right? We can just switch it all up, upside down, right side up, pretty much. So you got to be careful for that and be aware and have courage. So this was interesting news. I thought it was quite charming. So a former leader of the Ku Klux Klan, who also spent time in prison, is running for public office in North Georgia. Chester Doyle says he's a changed man. In most cases, convicted felons cannot hold office in Georgia. So, how does Doles get on the ballot? According to Georgia code, felons can hold elected office in Georgia if they get their civil rights restored and if at least 10 years have passed from the time they completed their sentence. So this guy just got through that and he had his rights restored. So this guy ran, but see, this sick, insane culture of wokeness is destroying America. These people want us gone. And we American patriots are the most endangered species. 61-year-old Chester Dole. So he's a boomer, of course, just on the edge of nearly Gen Xer, about 8 years, but yeah, 8 years older than me. Wow. So for me, that's young. That's not old. See where I'm coming from? And most of us, like say now, the world, we have a young world. We have a young world with young leaders, right? Not too long ago, our leaders were all like Joe Biden's age, right? Or Uncle Joe, as we'll call him here. A lot of them, 80, 90, nearly 100, till he died in office. And where here we are today, where we see, a lot of our leaders are not just making or just made 50. And that's relatively young considering that in 1968, once again, they weren't alive to see people getting their butts kicked up and down the streets, right? We fought for that, like John Lewis, right? The one that, people love to say, oh, he fought, he got punched in the head, and that's why he could cross a bridge now. That's how much they know. So now, here we go. It turns out that this gentleman here is now in an endangered species, as he wants to say it, calls himself a species. So Dole's running as a Republican for a seat on Lumpkin County Board of Commissioners. Stop socialism, save America, right? My main policy would be the guardian of the educational system of Lumpkin County to keep out critical race theory. What? Ding, ding, ding. Once again, Dole said, it's Marxist. It's trying to put a sense of white guilt into young white children. It needs to be abolished. So, let's just say systematic racism puts a sense of black guilt into young black children. It needs to be abolished. But who's got the balls to talk, right? If you look at Hosea Williams, he was on the city council, he was arrested 168 times. Congressman John Lewis, he was arrested 68 times. So that's not a reason to disqualify someone. Dole said, don't matter if you're out there for the civil rights movement, then I'm a white civil rights activist then, right? So can you imagine him being that age, beating up John Lewis, right? He might have been what, a child, or whatnot. And that's what we're saying we're fighting for today. The right to kick your butt no matter what for this white civil rights activist. This is not the first time Doles is front and center. The former leader of the Ku Klux Klan is quoted and featured in multiple newspaper clippings from the early 90s. Today, he tells Polanski that he's a changed man. That's good to know. That's good to know. 5 generations of the KKK. Do you publicly denounce racism, Polanski asked. I do publicly denounce racism. Yes, ma'am, Doles responded. Do you publicly denounce anti-Semitism? Polanski asked. Absolutely, Doles said. Why do you think you can win? Polanski asked. I think I can win because there's enough grassroots movement here in Georgia. Right? So, interesting times. There are minimum qualifications to become a candidate in this country. Yet, if you want to be a teacher, you have to have a certification. To be an attorney, you have to go through a process. But when it comes to running for elected office, to say I have zero experience, please elect me because I'm the best person to handle millions of dollars in a budget to oversee policy that takes care of hundreds of thousands of people. I find it odd that we don't request more for those seeking political office. Greer added. Most candidates in Georgia do not undergo background checks. Felons can hold elected office in Georgia if they get their civil rights restored. It's interesting, right? Because how many people get out of jail and they can't even get a job, right? Because the civil rights, isn't that a civil rights issue? But you can run for office. So I encourage people to run and get involved in county government. You know what? I think I'm going to consider running for government in Canada here or something because this is ridiculous, right? You're telling me you can, and hey, I'm seeing it and I'm realizing, I was one of those people who was really patriotic to vote for the party I really liked. And, up until even the last election, I was 100% for it over 30 some years back in my university years, right? And here I am today. And they, at least, and I'm not saying it's, the funny thing is we can't blame it on the party per se, but the incumbents and the people getting in there, right? Thus, maybe in the last from the time I was born, let's say in the late 60s, 68 to be exact, right? The grooming was already in full effect, like I was talking in my last post, right? So a lot of those folks, like Uncle Claus, who was maybe even young, well, in their 20s, or no, maybe not their 20s, but near at coming of age, a boomer age, right? They were creating this the WEF, right? The forum since 1971. And in that year, the US was pulling out of the arms agreement for that peacetime, and so many things happened. You have to look into the history. But now we're learning and understanding that this stuff was like the way things are going now, the people who are holding offices, a lot of them, yeah, we already kind of knew that it's been preordained. But at the same time, once again, does anyone have courage like we did in the back 50, 60, or even 40, man, to actually get involved and do that? It's almost like we're scared. Comptroller to take over majority black town of Mason ahead of Ford investment in West Tennessee. After the Tennessee's Town Board of Aldermen passed a resolution to keep their 153-year-old charter, the comptroller has begun a financial takeover which will limit the authority of the town's elected officials. Boom. I don't want to say good for you, but hey, what like how could that happen? Well, look at the history. It's been happening since the inception of the company, the incorporation of what is now the United States, right? Tennessee Comptroller Jason Mumpower said Tuesday that he will be taking control of the finances of Mason, Tennessee, a majority black town of about 1,500 people, located within 5 miles of the future site of Blue Oval City, the Ford electric truck and battery plant that represents one of the largest manufacturing investments in the state's history. I'm sad for the taxpayers of Mason, he said. We'll be working hard to step in and get their finances in shape. So, it's really, once again, for better of lack of words, say maybe we dropped the ball, or whoever was running things dropped the ball. Comptroller's move comes over the objection of Mason's elected officials, who have been fighting to maintain control over the town since Mumpower issued an ultimatum last month: either cede control of Mason's 153-year-old charter or face a financial takeover by the state. Relinquishing its charter would have placed the majority black majority Democrat town under control of largely white and Republican-led Tipton County. So on Monday last week, the town's board of aldermen in an emergency meeting passed a resolution to keep their charter, Vice Mayor Virginia Rivers said Tuesday. So a financial takeover will give the comptroller veto power over every expense of $100 or more, limiting the authority of elected officials to embark on plans already underway to implement beautification projects, improve infrastructure, and hire a code codes enforcer. Neely Fuller Jr., sir, please take the mic. So the code, remember the codes, benefit workforce and other budget cuts may soon falls black. So here we are, and I see that we're talking about, we're talking recently when we're talking about melanated people here, getting land, building the next Black Wall Street. Here you had literally, I would say, what's the word we call it? A prototype, right? Easy right there with buildings and everything. And why? How come no one took that over? Mumpower has pointed to a 20-year history of fiscal mismanagement by town leaders that has left it with deep debt and crumbling infrastructure. Mason leaders, he said, are ill-prepared to take advantage of growth and new investments that come with Blue Oval City. So, Mason officials have pushed back On Mum Power's assessment, the town ended up in a $500,000 financial hole caused in large part by fraud and embezzlement during prior administrations, River said. River said that she and other officials have been working hard to pay off debts accrued under those previous administrations. So in the all, taking control of finances from local officials is rare but not unprecedented step. In Tennessee, Van Buren County has been under the financial oversight of comptroller since 2020. Right? So it's I guess too bad because right, we talk so much, right? But no courage to make things happen. And when it happens, we're skeptical and we sabotage each other. This is a very concerning issue for the NAACP. And I do say it like that because it's exhausting, right? The mayor is black. The majority there are African Americans. They are in fact going to be controlled by the state officials who do not hold their values, right? Comptroller, comptroller. In the United States is a high-level executive that oversees the accounting tasks and financial reporting procedures of organizations. The comptroller oversees all accounting, including accounts receivable, payroll, and loan transaction. I guess of what, a town, right? The controller title is more frequently found in for-profit business, while the comptroller title is more commonly found in governmental. So yeah, so they got comptrolled. Get it? Control? You got control? So what do you know what so what happened to all that money? Did they buy nice cars? I mean, yeah, I'm allowed to say it. I'm a bro, right? What these bros do? What these bros do? These and sisters do? What they do with the money? Where'd the money go? Accountability. So let's look into last week we heard quite a bit about bioweapons, so I'm going to just quickly do a little, and of course, this is what the episode is about, right? The episode is about procreation by eugenic manipulation. And now we're here talking about these biological type of, I guess they say experiments, right? The popular population timeline. So they're saying, at least from what we're hearing about what happened with the current crisis in Europe, there was a rumor going around that, well, both sides and uh, our good old friends at the UN and whatnot are all concerned about this, who's studying what in biological studies to make people better or maybe not. Rumors are going around that it's part of a bigger, deeper, more sinister study and plan that's been going on, and it stretches over even into what happened in the last 2 years with the crisis of people not feeling well, and of course I'm choosing my words here, right? So if this is what's going down, I have to go and take a look at a little history to see what's going on. So biological warfare, also known as germ warfare, is the use of biological toxins or infectious agents such as bacteria, viruses, insects, and fungi with the intent to kill, harm, or incapacitate humans, animals, or plants as an act of war. So we all agree when you start screwing around with this stuff, it's an act of you're provoking an act of war. Biological weapons, often termed bioweapons, biological treat agents, or bioagents, are living organisms or replicating entities, which are not universally considered alive. And insect warfare, entomological. insect warfare is a subtype of biological warfare, right? So that uses insects to interrupt supply lines by damaging crops or direct harm to an enemy combatants and civilian populations. So this stuff's been going on, and let's see if what the laws say. Offensive biological warfare is prohibited under customary international humanitarian law. This is the law that regulates the conduct of war. It's a branch of international law that seeks to limit the effects of armed conflict by protecting persons who are not participating in hostilities and by restricting and regulating. Um, Here's my thing. Okay, wait, I'll just finish this. So yeah, and several international treaties. So we do have treaties that say, just like those treaties with war and so forth. In particular, the 1972, see, I was saying 1971, 72, right? With Uncle Claus and them. Biological Weapons Convention is a disarmament treaty that effectively bans biological and toxin weapons by prohibiting their development, production, acquisition, transfer, stockpiling, and use. Keep that in mind for the future. So they ban this of these weapons. Therefore, the use of biological agents in armed conflict is a war crime. And it doesn't only just, when we hear it, it's not just like, let's say, a spray bottle or, whatnot. We've seen people, we saw that happen. What was it? I believe it was Kim Unjun's half brother. They just sprayed something in his face and he was done in no time, right? When I saw that, that's when I said, you know what? That can't be good. Because even though you spray stuff on people's face like that and whatnot, well, it's still in the air, right? I was like, right off the bat, I was like, things that do make you go, Biological weapons may be employed in various ways to gain a strategic or tactical advantage over the enemy, either by threats or actual deployments. And it is biological warfare is distinct from warfare involving other types of weapons of mass destruction, right? And that is weapons of mass destructions are considered. We've heard this back in the Kuwait years with Saddam and all that, right? There's a big call out, big shout out, weapons of mass destruction, which we eventually heard, even from the horse's mouth, was not true. But I'll digress. So WMD is a nuclear, radiological, chemical, biological, and or any other weapon that can kill and bring significant harm to numerous individuals. Okay, so we know these are, what is this, area of denial weapon? Oh yeah, like this stuff, right? Barbed wires. So we see that anything that wants to harm you is a weapon, pretty much, right? And it's not considered kinetic or any of that. So a brief history. Rudimentary forms of biological warfare have been practiced since antiquity. And that's one of the biggest points I always make in my broadcast. Antiquity. Like we're talking even back in the days of Plato, Aristotle, these guys, you know, dreamt up a lot of this stuff and made it happen. And they wrote books and made ideologies, right? The earliest document incident of the intention to use biological weapons is recorded in Hittite text, right? That's biblical, right? A people of the Bronze Age Anatolia who created an empire centered on Hattusa as well as the parts of the northern Levant and upper Mesopotamia, right? Was an Indo-European language that was spoken by the Hittite. So the text of 1500 to 1200 BCE, in which victims of tularemia, rabbit fever, right, were driven into enemy lands, causing an epidemic. So that was one method. So that could be considered method, right? The Assyrians poisoned enemy wells with the fungus ergot. All right. Though with unknown results, Scythian archers dipped their arrows and Roman soldiers their swords into, into excrements and cadavers. Victims were commonly infected by tetanus as a result. In 1346, bodies of Mongol warriors of the Golden Horde, right? So all these folks tried to do each other, and who had died of a plague were thrown over the walls, and specialists disagree about whether this operation was responsible for the spread of the Black Death into Europe. So that's just what I was saying, even though that happened in such a while ago, it's still there, and it's probably responsible for what happened, what, 200 some years, 200 years later. And that was the most fatal pandemic recorded in human history. What caused that? That's a whole other topic, right? And from there, from 1763. So this is not a new thing. It's been used, and it's part of our makeup. What the World Health Organization says about biological weapons is they are microorganisms, like, yes, like we said previously. But what's their response to all of this? Who focuses on the possible public health consequences of an incident, regardless of whether it is characterized as a deliberate act or a naturally occurring event? When a member state is concerned and wants to be prepared, who advises the strengthening public health surveillance and response activities with an emphasis on more effective national surveillance of outbreaks of illness, including alert and response systems at all levels that can detect diseases that may be deliberately caused, better communication between multiple sectors, including public health, water supply, food safety, nuclear safety, and poison control, improved assessments of vulnerability, and effective communication about risks to both professionals and the public, preparation for handling the psychosocial consequences of the deliberate use of pathogens and chemicals to cause harm, and contingency plans for an enhanced response capacity by all sectors. So, this is what they're saying about that, how they feel about that. So, these, of course, have been around. These, I don't necessarily need to say all their names, but if you can make it out, they're toxins. Bioterrorism attacks could also result in an epidemic. For example, if Ebola or Lassa viruses were used as the biological agents. It's funny because they've kind of pop up and gone. Every time you hear something in Africa, every time on time since the beginning of time. Something happened, well, in Africa today, right? Because it's almost like they test everything out there. I have to say it, right? Because anytime you see something, even now, even within the last couple, 3 years, Uncle Bill came out and said, in a sense, he said, he was sad because, the people, essentially, their own body and system was able to heal them, even though it came up with a different type of, let's say, a different type of cold. If you can read between the lines, the old cold helped them beat whatever nastiness, which some people claim is natural, but most and highly likely unnatural, infect them. It beats it out. So there you go. So when I see these things like Ebola, like all the, when I came to Toronto here in the year, it was 2002, it was in the middle of what they called a major crisis with, at the time, which I'm not sure if it's the same thing, but there was an illness. I'm just gonna say a SARS illness. This is like 20 years ago now, right? I'm here 20 years ago, and I left Montreal, and when I came here, one of the reasons why I came here was because I was like, you know what? I gotta go to Toronto to help out. I still have that in me. I still have that courage and that patriotism, if you want to call it, or that activism. That was one of the reasons why I came, because I was hearing, well, there might have been a shortage of, and they were putting it in pandemic proportions. Many of you were not even born then. And if you were born, you were just children, at most teenagers, emotional teenagers, emos, right? But I came to Toronto and I was like, you know what? I'm going to be a trooper. I'm going to be a patriot. I'm going to come here and see what opportunities. And I've been here for 20 years. And noted, we had a big blackout not too long after, right? That was part of the West Coast. And all of this was in the couple of years after 9/11, right? And so seeing through all of that, even, with the whole first incidents of what could have been a pandemic and whatnot, I was just like, I was able to look at things from a different perspective. And that's why I say sometimes you gotta, some of the elders can give good resources and good information if we take a chance to listen and give it a chance. 12:10 a.m. going on 12:11, the first hour is done, and we're not gonna try and keep too long. But I just, and I'd like to give a shout out to the folks out there who are supporting this channel and enjoying the post and giving thumbs up. Please subscribe and share. Thank you very much. And also shout out to the folks who that I would say are the biggest, better than TV broadcast and streams, the IUIC, the GOCC, and all the Israelites out there. Shalom. And yeah, thank you for your support. So these are all the books on eugenics that come out uh, in centuries and in years, right? So this is not a new thing. Look at that, they got the best books on eugenics. The best books, if you want to read, right? I actually downloaded a couple of books. One of them, Charles Darwin, we're going to take a brief look at on the origin of species, right? And this was like the Bible. So a lot of this also helped what was to be eugenics and movements, and of course, which eventually was based upon a lot of the stuff that was already being done. So we're not going to say that when we say eugenics was, once again, since antiquity, these type of things have been around, and thus in 1859, 1900s, which was the beginning of the 20th century, that stuff took off. It took off, right? And so when he wrote this book, this was the introduction. Chapter 1, Variation under Domestication, Variation under Nature, Struggle for Existence, Natural Selection, Laws of Variation, Difficulties in Theory, on Theory, Instinct, Hybridism, on the Imperfection of the Geological Record, on the Geological Succession of Organic Beings, Geographical Distribution, Mutual Affinities of Organic Beings, Morphology, Embryology, Rudimentary Organs, Geographical Distribution Continued, Recapitulation and Conclusion. So this is what they were able to bring out. And it's a good read. It definitely, if you can handle it, I highly recommend it. You can download it. So I know a lot of folks don't have money, especially when you're coming from the inner city and you want to get this. So yeah, if you look up the origin of species, and another download I was able to get, who was also part of the eugenics essays on Sir Francis Galton. So he also, I'll give you a little read here on what he was all about. But the possible improvement of the human breed under the existing conditions of law and sentiment in fulfilling the honorable charge that has been entrusted to me of delivering the Huxley lecture, I shall endeavor to carry out what I understand to have been the wish of its founders, namely to treat broadly some new topic belonging to a class in which Huxley himself would have felt a keen interest rather than to expatiate on his character and the work of his noble life. That I have selected for tonight is one which has occupied my thoughts for many years and to which a large part of my published inquiries have borne a direct, though silent, reference. Indeed, the remarks I am about to make would serve as an additional chapter to my books on hereditary genius and on natural inheritance. My subject will be the possible improvements of the human race under the existing conditions of law and sentiment. So that's where this guy was going, right? And they get so detailed and intricate with it, right? Natural inheritance, and they came up with those terms. So, and look how deep, look, by the numbers and everything. So this is also something you might want to download, and it's on a PDF. If you don't have money, essays in eugenics, to see where this guy was going, right? Because this is what built and makes what we are today, in at least for medicine. So were there pros and cons to this? Well, let's take a look. So eugenics, okay, good, well, genes come into being, growing, is a set of beliefs and practices that aim to improve the genetic quality of a human population, historically by excluding people in groups to be judged inferior by promoting those judged to be superior. In recent years, the term has seen a revival in bioethical discussions on the usage of new technologies such as CRISPR and genetic screening. So this was a genetic engineering technique in molecular biology by which the genomes of living organisms may be modified. Right? So this is just something to know what that's all about. And of course, screening, DNA testing. All right. So there's a heated debate on whether these technologies should be called eugenics or not. So we're not calling it yet, but the concept predates the term Plato. Remember him? Our bro Plato and Aristotle and the philosopher. And so it goes back with these guys, suggesting applying the principles of selective breeding, right? And this is a process by human use animal breeding and plant breeding, right, to make tapes. Even weed, for all you potheads out there, right? Yeah, crossbreeding. All right, selective breeding to humans around 400 BC before Christ, which shows Christ is real because we can actually name a whole era, right? So before Christ. Early advocates of eugenics in the 19th century regarded it as a way of improving groups of people. In contemporary usage, the term eugenics is closely associated with scientific racism. Pseudo-scientific. So the word pseudo, not really, belief that empirical evidence exists to support. So it's pseudo-scientific belief, a belief that empirical evidence, which is written up and calculated, it's a belief that that stuff, like we saw earlier, those, these, I guess this stuff, the standard scheme of descent, right? Selective breeding around 400 BC. So scientific racism. Modern bioethics, who advocate new eugenics, characterize it as a way of enhancing individual traits regardless of group membership. So there was a new eugenics, also known as liberal. Isn't that interesting? Liberal eugenics. Huh? I would hate to know what right wing eugenics is. No pun intended. Advocates enhancing human characteristics and capabilities through the use of reproductive technology and human genetic engineering. Those who advocate new eugenics generally think selecting or altering embryos should be left to the preference, I'll just finish that, of parents, rather than forbidden or left to the preferences of the state. So new eugenics purports to distinguish itself from the forms of eugenics practice and advocated in the 20th century, which fell into disrepute after World War II. No kidding. So the new eugenics is broken into categories of positive eugenics, encouraging reproduction among the designated fit, and negative eugenics, discouraging reproduction among those designated unfit. So according to this guy here, Many positive eugenic programs were advocated and pursued during the early 20th century, but negative programs were responsible for the compulsory sterilization of hundreds of thousands of persons in many countries and were contained in much of the rhetoric of Nazi eugenic policies. So when these guys get involved, this is what happens, right? Social policies of eugenics in Nazi Germany, the racial ideology of racism placed the biological improvement of the German people by selective breeding of Nordic or Aryan traits at its center. Okay? So this is where they're trying to convince themselves. And don't forget now, we haven't even touched on the roots of where we come from. They're already trying to bleach it out. The term racial hygiene was used to describe an approach to eugenics in the 20th century, which found its most extensive implementation in Nazi Germany. It was marked by efforts to avoid miscegenation, analogous to an animal breeder seeking purebred animals. So that's how they used to think, right? And then genocide, stop the black genocide, hashtag transangelic, hashtag. Genocide is the intentional destruction of a people, usually defined as an ethnic, national, racial, or religious group. This guy coined the term. Here we go, coining terms. Coined the term in 1944, combining the Greek word with the Latin suffix. Genocido. So, yeah, there we go. Cousin marriage, for example, are widely considered justified. So because of that, I guess we're saying compulsory sterilization of those deemed unfit is a form of coercive eugenics that has been overwhelmingly rejected in the 21st century and is illegal under many international and national laws. So the new eugenics generally supports genetic modification using biotechnology and the manipulation of the genes, right? Nanotechnology or genetic selection of individuals for traits that are supposed to improve human welfare. The underlying idea is to improve the genetic basis of future generations and reduce incidence of genetic diseases and other undesirable traits. Once again, pre-implantation diagnosis and embryo selection, selective breeding, and human enhancement through the use of genetic technologies, such as embryo engineering and gene therapy. So there you go. And of course, the ethics. Liberal ethic values of pluralism, meaning doctrine of multiplicity, often used in opposition to monism and dualism. So yeah, definitely some, and you can look these up and see what's this bio happiness. So is the elevation of well-being in humans through biological methods, including germline engineering. So that's like assisted reproductive technology, art, medical procedures used primarily to address infertility, involves procedures such as in vitro, IVF, fertilization, intracytoplasmic sperm injection, cryopreservation of game tests or embryos. So that's what that's all about. Biohappiness through screening embryos with genes associated with a high level of happiness. How do you measure that? Or the use of drugs, of course, intended to raise baseline levels of happiness. Like what? Blow? The object is to facilitate the achievement of a state of better than well. So it's part of the whole transhumanist thing, right? And this gentleman here is a prominent figure within transhumanism movement and the association. So that's also part, that's a spin-off in some ways to say, right, what it is now. Coming from the perfectionism. Transhumanism, real quick, is a philosophical and intellectual movement in which advocates for the enhancement of the human condition by developing and making widely available sophisticated technologies that can greatly enhance longevity and cognition. It also predicts the inevitability of such technologies in the future. Transhumanist thinkers study the potential benefits and dangers of emerging technologies that could overcome fundamental human limitations as well as the ethics of using such technologies. Some transhumanists believe that the human beings may eventually be able to transform themselves into beings with abilities so greatly expanded from the current condition as to merit the label of post-human beings. Originating in the fields of science fiction. But does it mean that it's going to happen? Well, we've been prepped for it. And once again, why I wanted to cover some of these is because even though here we are today, living in a, I mean, I feel my body. I don't feel physically that I come from a monkey or or an ape. However, it seems that even though this has been around forever, there's always been, at least in man, the inertia to want to always change ourselves, do something that always challenges God, but in the heaviest way. For example, we can't say surgeons are bad because they help people, right? Without surgeries, many people wouldn't make it in this, would die, right? So good comes out of certain things that may be considered nefarious. It doesn't mean that we have to, I believe, encourage or endorse those people. So, for example, with Nazi Germany, a lot of we know today, it's not a secret with Operation Paperclip, all right, and NASA, we know, all right. A lot of the medicines, for example, the contact lens, a lot of this stuff came out, from experiments done on people, during those genocidal years, unfortunately. And somehow, later on, it's been, how we say, cleaned, bleached, bleach washed of that past. So that, once again, if you're looking at like not talking about critical race theory, well, this is kind of a little bit of, you know, how it's done. If they want to get rid of it, they're going to have to change a lot of the language. Charles Robert Darwin, 12 February 1809, 19 April 1882, was an English naturalist, geologist, and biologist, best known for his contributions to evolutionary biology. Right? His proposition that all species of life have descended from common ancestors is now widely accepted, right? And considered a fundamental concept in science in a joint publication with Alfred Russel Wallace, conceiving he's best known for independently conceiving the theory of evolution through natural selection, right? He introduced a scientific theory that is branching pattern, that this branching pattern of evolution resulted from a process that he called natural selection, right? And it's, once again, the different differential survival and reproduction of individuals due to differences in phenotype. It is a key mechanism of evolution, the change in the heritable traits characteristics of a population over generations. Okay, so he's one of the most influential figures who brought this stuff in. And thus, with the book of The Origin of Species that we took a look on, published in 1859, this is a scientific literature that made it so for him to establish this. So, did good come out of it? Well, yeah, we can. How, factual and true it is, once again, that's debatable. And it's debatable because now into like what, two, almost, over 100 years and more, this is where we are. So if we were to doubt it, that would put a lot of people with degrees out of business, right? You know that. So this is why also, since we've gone so far down the rabbit hole with everything and how it correlates with eugenics, Yeah, at the end of the day, it's just simple man doing this. So by the 1870s, the scientific community and the majority of the educated public had accepted evolution as a fact. And those people, once again, those were the people in the upper scales of it, the intellect, the age of uh, enlightenment, as they call it, right? So they were all woke. That word we hate today, they were the ones who started that, right? Woke is enlightenment. Funny, we can't even say that now. No, it's only because we are saying it, right? Not them. So, however, many favored competing explanations that only gave a minor role to natural selection. It was not until the emergence of modern evolutionary synthesis from the 1930s to the 1950s that a broad consensus developed in which natural selection was the basic mechanism of evolution. Life sciences, right? And that's what it developed. Biodiversity. So let's see where he comes from. Early life and education. I always like to hit up on that. So, and who's his mama? He was the fifth of six children of wealthy society doctor and financier Robert Darwin and Susanna Darwin. Right? Let's just take a quick look here. She was the daughter of Josiah and Sarah Wedgwood and grew up at Ruthria Hall. So Joshua Wedgwood, an English potter, entrepreneur, and abolitionist, founding the Wedgwood Company in 1759. Okay, so that's Josiah. So he was successful, and at the age of 7, he was sent to a boarding school in Manchester. Uh, let's see. Erasmus Darwin, father of Robert Darwin, okay, had been a friend of Josiah. And she had known the family since childhood. At one point, giving, oh, okay, this must have been the mother, yeah. So, since childhood, at one point, giving Erasmus Jr. music lessons, she was an accomplished harpsichordist. Okay, so that's the mom. And this is Charles, and he had a brother, Erasmus Alvey Darwin, and he's the older brother. So at least they got a chance. Actually, we didn't see her picture. Yeah, Dazi Mamida, age 16, 1816. Susanna Darwin's daughter, right? That's the daughter. Right? All right, so that's, and so his dad, Robert Darwin, was an English medical doctor, today best known as the father of the naturalist, yeah, member of the influential Darwin Wedgwood family. So they're the connection, two families together, prominent medical, right? That's the papi, that's the daddy there, right? Daddy Darwin. So we got that. And he was born in Litchfield, son of Erasmus Darwin, this guy, right? The grandfather of them. So see the resemblance. And his first wife, Mary Howard, we can find her. He was named after his uncle Robert Waring Darwin of Elston, an English botanist. So these people, they was around for a minute. They were the folks that was naming butterflies and going on those expeditions, right? And naming all kinds of animals. That's them because they made the books and they wrote it. So there we go. So they all were studying, they all took on, and they're all part of the same fam. So back to little Charles, right here, looks just like him. Got the same nose and mouth, eh? Just like you see the pictures, eh? All right, so his grandfather, his grandfathers, right? We saw Erasmus Darwin and Josiah Wedgwood, all right? Were both prominent abolitionists. Erasmus Darwin had praised general concept of evolution and common descent in his Zoonomia, 1794. So these guys wrote this book here dealing with pathology, anatomy, psychology, and functioning of the body. Its primary framework is one of associationist psychophysiology. Okay, so that was the book. A poetic fantasy of gradual creation, including undeveloped ideas and anticipating concepts, his grandson explained. So you're Unitarian, right? Believe that God in Christianity is one singular entity as opposed to a trinity. So this was the brief on his life, early life, and where he got his inception. And this him when he was a young guy, still looked like the same guy, right? So let's see. I just want to get more to the point where this actually started. So he was also part of the zoology, and of course by then it would seem that he was doing a lot of expeditions. But you know what? This is quite a long read, and I don't want to bore you here with reading. I just want to get to the point. And then he married his cousin, but we just wanted to really get into what it is here. So, continuing his research in London, Darwin's wide reading now included the sixth edition of Malthus's An Essay on the Principle of Population. On September 28, 1838, he noted its assertion that the human population, when unchecked, goes on doubting itself every 25 years or increases in geometrical ratio. A geometric progression so that population soon exceeds food supply in what was known as Malthusianism. Malthusianism, the idea that population growth is potentially exponential, there we go, while the growth of the food supply or other resources is linear, which eventually reduces living standards to the point of triggering a population die-off. So that's what that Malthusian catastrophe is called, right? So so this is like in depth, but you definitely want to check and look into that. Thomas Henry Huxley, English biologist, specializing comparative anatomy, and he became as Darwin's bulldog for his advocacy on evolution. He also coined agnosticism, right, which is the view of belief that the existence of God, of the divine or supernatural, is unknown or unknowable. Human reason is incapable of providing sufficient rational grounds to justify either the belief that God exists or the belief that God does not exist. So he coined the word agnostic. See, they coined words in 1869. Seems that a man shall not say he knows or believes that which he has no scientific grounds for professing to know or believe. So that was that, bro. So human evolution is the evolutionary process within history of primates that led to the emergence of Homo sapiens as a distinct species of the hominid family, which includes the great apes. And so this is part of the human evolution. But let's just get to the point. So before Darwin, the word Homo, the name of biological genus to which humans belong, is Latin for human. It was chosen originally by Carl Linnaeus in his classification system. The word human is from Latin humanus, the adjectival form of homo. The Latin homo derives from Indo-European root digum or earth. Right? So Linnaeus and other scientists of his time also considered the great apes to be the closest relatives of human based on morphological and anatomical similarities. And its morphology is a branch of biology dealing with the study of the form and structure of organism and their specific structural features. So this is where I get kind of like, okay, I'm here, you're here, we're human. Is there anything that feels less ape about you? Please stand up. No, you feel like a human because you can think, you can dream. So that's where a lot of this stuff does come in to question. Darwin, the possibility of linking humans with earlier apes by descent became clear only after 1859 with the publication of the book, The Origin of Species, in which he argued the idea for evolution of the new species from the earlier one. Darwin's book did not address the question of human evolution, saying only that light will be thrown on the origin of man and his history. So once again, it arose from these guys, right? Thomas Henry Huxley, Richard Owen. So Huxley argued, yeah, interesting. He also was a paleontologist, despite being a controversial figure. He's being generally considered to be an outstanding naturalist. Yeah, there's always something good about everyone, right? So Huxley argued for human evolution from apes by illustrating many of the similarities and differences between human and other apes, and did so particularly in his 1863 book, Evidence as to Man's Place in Nature. So that's where these drawings came up. Remember this business, right? He gives the evidence for evolution of humans and apes from a hominin. So, ta-da! One day you're there, next day you're there. So and so the first fossils. This is where I start to wonder, right? A major problem of the 19th century was the lack of fossil intermediaries. Neanderthal remains were discovered in a limestone quarry. All right, and this was 3 years before the publication of the On the Origin of Species. So they were finding these fossils, and they were discovered in Africa in 1891. And so from there, I guess they were trying to put in a nutshell, they're just trying to break it down. They were actually taking these skulls and somehow trying to compare it up to, let's say, an actual human skull. And then they just basically said somewhere down the line we merged to make this morph into this human being, but there's no link. So that's why they used to say there's a missing link. Right? Nothing made sense. If you even look at the brains of chimpanzees, monkeys, it's not the same. So I don't want to linger too long, but this is pretty much I guess the question that we should ask. Now, when you're talking about people who have lived for so long as a tribe and existed all this time, it's always important to understand how, because this is what science is all about. It's trying to understand how we get here and how we existed. So a lot of what's also being said is that there's evidence for interbreeding between archaic and modern humans. During the Middle Paleolithic and Upper Paleolithic, interbreeding happened in several independent events that included Neanderthals, right? They were extinct, and Denisovans with modern humans. It took place several times. The introgression events into modern humans are estimated to have happened about 47,000 to 65,000 years ago with Neanderthals, and 44 to 54,000 years ago with Denisovans. So, so they say they do find these genes, but at the end of the day, even if we talk about archaic human admixture with human beings, it's been moved or renamed. So my question is once again, how do we get into morph into this? They tell us that we were mixed with other tribes, right? But they're throwing in the Neanderthal, but they don't exist anymore. Morphology. The upper Paleolithic brutal remains of modern human child from this area in Portugal features the traits that indicate Neanderthal interbreeding with modern humans, dispersing into Iberia. So they were already looking into this to make it seem or and to claim it. But nothing is discussed of spirituality and or anything about God, right? We hear a lot about the genetics. So I think this is where we see the changes in modern humans. This is what I was looking for. Exploring the immune system's HLA alleles, yeah. So human leukolyte antigen system or complex is complex of genes. So this is genes. It has been suggested that HLA-B uh, B73 B*73 introgressed from Denisovians into modern humans in Western Asia due to the distribution pattern and divergence. So there's some hot stuff here. Rapid decay of fossils in sub-Saharan African environments makes it currently unfeasible to compare modern human admixture with reference samples of archaic sub-Saharan African hominins. So you've got this happening. So they're saying it's the interbreeding that makes this happen. And of course, during the 20th century, South Africa became metonym for racism, right? So we're talking about eugenics ideas. They were prevalent everywhere. And this is on eugenicsarchive.ca. Let's see. Ontario never passed any formal eugenic laws, but was home to vocal advocates and national organizations that supported the cause of eugenics. So let's see Canada altogether. Most Canadian provinces considered the idea of eugenics during the first part of the 20th century. Only Alberta, British Columbia ultimately passed laws that created eugenics programs in 1928 and 1933, respectively. And let's scroll down here. Let's see. Post-eugenic, Alberta's Sexual Sterilization Act was repealed in 1972, and British Columbia the following a year later, right? But there's still a lot of cases. Let's look at a little history here. Motivations when why Canadian laws were considered progressive at the time that they came into the effect. They had been supported by feminists, socialist farmers, Anglo-Saxon Protestants who believed that Canada, especially Western Canada, could produce an ideal society by restricting fertility within certain groups of people and by encouraging, among others. In the first few decades of the program, reformers in Western Canada identified new immigrants as undermining the creation of an ideal Anglo-Saxon community, and families from Eastern Europe fared worse in assessments of intelligence and in public health surveys. Over time, through the target groups in Alberta shifted from immigrants to orphaned and disabled children to Métis and First Nations women. Men and boys were sterilized slightly less than women at 42%, but by the end of the program, Aboriginal women were the primary subjects of sterilizations. So, shout out to my Aboriginal First Nations people. Where are you? I got to hear more from you. We got to hear you. You know, we've had the pandemic, we've had everything that's happened, and now this, right? I really want to hear more because it seems that as much as Black people have issues and worldwide, even in Canada, I can say natives are really, they're overlooked. It's ridiculous, right? When it comes to their drinking water in the communities, the Inuit people. And of course, they also had been part of these sterilizations, right? If you see in the history, all throughout the 1930s. Ah, here we are. I did see something about it. So, Quebec encouraged reproduction among its residents to bolster its population and therefore its political power as a form of positive eugenics. It did so by establishing baby bonuses and financial incentives for large families. Ontario, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan all drafted sterilization laws, which were defeated in the 1930s. The Northwest Territories has yet a different experience as sterilizations became very controversial in the 1970s, with some people claiming that those surgeries were being done involuntarily as an act of genocide against the Inuit people, and others suggesting that the high birth rate combined with maternal and infant mortality meant that some Inuit women were requesting sterilizations as a form of birth control. So, whether facts or not, once again, right? But did some good come out of it? Yeah. I mean, in the sense that, well, we have maybe better birth control, right? And not every doctor is, a mad scientist. The only thing we do need, though, is for the courage of folks to help make things better. So the history of in vitro fertilization goes back, once again, more than half a century. In 1959, the first birth of a non-human mammal resulting from IVF occurred, and in 1978, the world's first baby conceived by IVF was born. So as medicine advanced, IVF was transformed from natural research to stimulated clinical treatment. And this has been going on, I'm sure, forever, right? But prior to the development of IVF in humans, Walter Heap, right? He was a zoologist, embryologist, a physician, and professor at the University of Cambridge, was doing research on reproduction in animals. In 1891, Heap reported the first successful embryo transfer in a mammal. 1891. As early as 1934, Gregory Goodwin Pincus, this guy, American biologist who co-invented the combined oral contraceptive pill, and Ernst Vinces Enzmann tried to perform IVF in rabbits. Although the pregnancy was successful, it was later determined that the fertilization occurred in vivo in the body. John Rock was the first to extract an intact fertilized egg in 1948. So Rack and Miriam Menken, the first scientist who, the first person to conceive human life outside of the body. So that's who she was, retrieved over 800 oocytes. So this is the female gamocytes, of which 138 were exposed to spermatozoa in vitro. They published their findings in American Journal of Obstetrics and Genealogy. There was a transient biochemical pregnancy reported by Australia Foxton School researchers in 1953. 1958, Anne McLaren and John Biggers published a landmark paper outlining how they had successfully grown mouse embryos in vitro and transferred them into a female mice. So this showed it was possible to mix sperm and egg outside a woman's reproductive system and create a healthier embryo. Lin Chu Chang proved fertilization in vitro was capable of producing a birth of a live rabbit. So it's been a minute. Yeah. So he was a biologist also. And some of the early pregnancies, Steptoe and Robert Edwards started collaborating in human IVF research in 1968. 1977, Steptoe and Edwards successfully carried out a pioneering conception which resulted in the birth of the world's first baby to be conceived by IVF, Louise Brown, July 25th, 1978. So, and we also have, and this is all over the world, 78, Subhash Mukhopadhyay, a physician from Kolkata, India, was performing experiments on his own with primitive instruments and a household refrigerator, and this resulted in a test tube baby. A household refrigerator, and this was okay. Later named as Durga, alias Kanupriya Argawal, was born on October 78. However, state authorities prevented him from presenting his work at scientific conferences, and in the absence of scientific evidence, his work wasn't recognized, right? So, and Steptoe and Edwards were responsible for the world's first confirmed boy conceived, Alistair Montgomery, born the 14th of January, 1979. So this has been going on for a minute, right? It's not new. And so for that, we can say that, and here's one of the scientists, pioneer of fertility treatment, Jean Marion Purdy, and she was also part of the birth of developing in vitro for Louise Joy Brown. So yeah, I mean, there are miracles to be done, and the power of a surgeon is very, very godly indeed, in the sense that God gives them the power. You know, there was such a saying: a surgeon is like God's you know partner, right? They are magicians in the sense that they can help and heal. We just worry about the ones that maybe take it a step too far, right? Because if you look back at all the old surgeries when they would take out a tooth, even to take out a tooth, right? There used to be a lot. It was way more barbaric. They'd give you some powerful knockout liquid and cut you up. So all of that did come from, which was a lot more ghastly. But we're more civilized, and we have been more civilized since the 20th century, at least. So why are we still doing this? So as you see, another Louise Brown. So there she is. And she's the first woman now in her 40s, if I'm correct. And she has two sons on top of that, right? She's also, um, she was also able to conceive, right? And she has a sister also. Her younger sister, Natalie Brown, was also conceived through IVF 4 years later and became the world's 40th child after conception by IVF. 1999, Natalie was the first human born after conception by IVF to give birth herself without IVF. So, pretty cool, you know? I mean, there's good things. Now, here's the question. Do we have more of everybody who was born this way in our society, maybe since the beginning of time? Could it be our grandparents? Could it be our parents? Could it be you? Could I be one of those who have come into the world this way? We never think about it, but there's probably more than you would dare to imagine. Which begs the question, how many natural births are out there as compared to IVF? And it's good to know that at least, one who's born that way, we hope will be born and come in this world with a good soul. And imagine the kids who are not, and imagine the children who are or and left behind. I'm sure that must cause a major dilemma. Let's look at nanotechnology, also shortened to nanotech. I wanted to look into this because I know this is also, of when we're talking about how the science is made. Like today, they're using these tools. There are several important modern developments: the atomic force microscope, high resolution type of scanning probe microscopy with demonstrated resolution, and all of this. The scanning tunneling microscope, type of microscope used for imaging surfaces at the atomic level. So these are some of the tools that they're using to make tiny, tiny nanotechnology. Right? It scans the specimen. I'm trying to find the tool, but this will be on the next blog, right? Because somehow with the transhumanism, we're hearing about this, and they're bringing these things, and of course, they're probably called pros. Maybe it can help, you know, make better medications, right? Now, do you want to have maybe something more material in you? That's another question. What it's made of is another question, right? Jack E. Steele, Bionics, another interesting thing as we're winding down. It's now 12:59. Thank you very much for joining in on this broadcast here of the date. Tonight we covered population and eugenics. And what is eugenics, right? And how far has it gone? Now, in popular culture, because I like to also cover the communication aspect of it. So, Cyborg is a 1972 science fiction secret agent novel written by Martin Kay. The novel also included elements of speculative fiction, and it was adapted as the television movie The $6 Million Man, which was followed by a weekly series of the same name. So, the plot summary of this show: the story of an astronaut who experiences a sorry, I cannot speak tonight, and I'm having problems with my glasses. But catastrophic crash. Thank you very much for your patience. During a flight, leaving him with all but one limb destroyed, blind in one eye, and with other major injuries. At the same time, a secret part of the American government, the official, the Office of Strategic Operations (OSO) has taken interest and concerning bionics, the replacement of human body parts with mechanical prosthetics in the context of this novel are more powerful than original limbs. So yeah, so this created what we call a spin-off, and this, of course, the spin-off of Bionic Woman and the $6 Million Man was the show of the time, based on that book, based on the movie, right? So after this NASA in this television series, NASA test flight accident, Austin is rebuilt with superhuman strength, speed, vision due to the bionic implants, right? And as in the movie. So this went on for like it had a good run. I mean, and then you had the spin-off of Bionic Woman, which was his girlfriend essentially, and he married her at the end of the franchise. You know, they had what we call a couple of movies in the 1990s, and it was just, and from there was wrapped up. Sandra Bullock was a bionic girl. They had $6 Million Man Jr. He had a son. So you had the bionic dog. You had Bigfoot. You had Mastatron. You had another colonel. I forget his name that he was fighting with. So this was a popular series, and they had many spin-offs. God knows they had this on TV for me when I was a kid during my birthday in September. The powers that be, the Masons were like, "Look, Richard's gonna start watching this. Let's make sure we get on his birthday for a new season, right? September 11th, 77, 76, 75. You know, so yeah, there were novels written, and so this guy had bionic power, and he was able to do anything. And I believe, in conclusion, as we're wrapping up, a lot of the things with eugenics, and especially in the war, a lot of reasons why they were doing these experiments, and we still hear today, is because they want to make the super soldier, right? Or like when we were kids, we all wanted to fly, we all wanted superpowers, just like we see today. Forget about godly powers, right? Because superpowers can't save souls. But we all wanted to have the extra strength that we can be invincible to bullets and arms and everything. And yeah, that ties into the whole war, eugenics, war and peace thing, right? The ultimate society. So yeah, this was a popular show back in the day. Let's see if you have some images. But yeah, this guy used to he got in that crash, and next thing you know, and this is the book and the movie, the book actually. Yeah, you see with these new limbs, and they had toys. So there were some good things, I guess, that came out of the. See, this is him. This is the famous one when he would when the show would start. We can build them. We can. It was a nice intro to the show where they would say he was a man barely alive. We can rebuild him. We have the technology. We have the technology to create the world's first bionic man. We can make him better than he was built before. Better, stronger, faster. So for copyrights, I'm not going to play the video, but I can at least show you. Yeah, that's the one with Sandra Bullock, Bionic Showdown, right? So she's officially a bionic chick. Something to check out. I hope they maybe bring it back. He's still around too, right? So the study of the bionics, Biologically inspired engineering, the application of biological methods and systems found in nature to study and design of engineering systems and modern technology. Coined by Jockey in 1950, is a portmanteau from biology, and electronics, so bionics. And it was popularized in the 1970s because of these shows, right? Superpowers by electromechanical implants. So I don't know if we could really eventually really do that. Once again, we are made of blood and bone. So if it's God's will, so be that. I mean, yeah, we do have limbs that actually are mechanical and they do work. And once again, there is good, but one would have to ask about the ethics, right? The ethics, the history of evolutionary thought, the recognition that species change over time, and the perceived understanding of how such processes work has roots in antiquity. Again, way back in the past, in the ideas of the ancient Greeks, Romans, and Chinese, as well as medieval Islamic science. With the beginnings of modern biological taxonomy in the late 17th century, two opposed ideas influenced Western biological thinking. Essentialism, a set of attributes that are necessary to their identity. In early Western thought, Plato's idealism held that all things have such an essence, an idea, or form. Aristotle similarly proposed that all objects have a substance that, as George Lakoff put it, make the thing what it is, and without which it would be not that kind of thing. The contrary view, non-essentialism, denies the need to post it such in essence. So it's been essential from the beginning. Plato in the Parmenides dialogue depicts Socrates questioning the notion, suggesting that if we accept the idea that every beautiful thing or just action partakes of an essence to be beautiful, or just we must also accept the existence of separate essences for hair, mud, and dirt. So there you go. So this is all the thought of man. But before we wrap down, it's important to know that we all come from the same, right? I mean, we look at the Sans people, are members of various Kyoto tribes speaking indigenous hunter-gatherer cultures that are the first cultures of southern Africa. So let's see here. Their history are among the hunter-gatherer San are among the oldest culture on the earth and are thought to be descended from the first inhabitants of what is now Botswana and South Africa. So these folks were here, as you know, we're saying, or as the story says, have been around for well over if I'm correct, 400 and thousands of years. Let me see here. I believe there is a history. We have the genetics. Ah, there we go. Set of tools almost identical to that used by modern sand and dating to 42,000 BC was discovered at a border cave. So historical evidence shows that certain sand communities have always lived in the desert regions of Kalahari. So this is all to say that if you can see that these folks are still around, right? And it's one of the oldest tribes of like, if not the oldest tribe right now in our planet. And they were able to survive through everything that's been going on. Says something. It definitely says something about us African genetic rooted people as a rooted people, right? So certain SANS groups are one of 14 known extant ancestral population clusters. So that means we're related to these people. And I guess once we come to the terms that You all should be treated equal as such, and know that yes, even if you are white or black or from Europe or Asia, the Middle East, your great 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 grandparent looks like this, right? These are your roots. And even if you might be 100% removed or 99% removed, how can you hate these people? Why? What they do to you? It's now 1:10 a.m. Today's date is the 21st of March, 2022. Thank you very much for checking in tonight. And a very powerful in the sense of information and seeing what's coming up and what will be coming up in the following weeks and the week ahead. It's important for you to be active, and there's going to be a lot of changes. And at the same time, it's not going to be the same like it was before. But in the meantime, we can all try to support each other and try to grow in knowledge and try to learn a lot more about each other, especially when it comes to knowing our roots and knowing who we are as Israelites, right? Because that's a big part of it. We've been removed by all of these eugenics and philosophical teachings and anything that came out or was built out of Rome after the destruction of Jerusalem in the first in 70 AD. It seems that the world was reorganized upside down, right side up. So I'm just going to wrap up here. It's 1:11 a.m. I'm just at the 2 hour match. Thank you very much for joining in. I'm just going to say this quick psalm. I will praise the Lord. I will praise thee, O Lord, with my whole heart. I will shew forth all thy marvelous works. I will be glad and rejoice in thee. I will sing praises to thy name, O Most High. When mine enemies are turned back, they shall fall and perish at thy presence. For thou hast maintained my right and my cause. Thou sattest in the throne, judging right. Thou hast rebuked the heathen. Thou hast destroyed the wicked. Thou hast put out their name forever and ever. O thou enemy, destructions are come to a perpetual end. And thou hast destroyed cities, their memorial is perished with them. But the Lord shall endure forever and ever. He hath prepared his throne for judgment, and he shall judge the world in righteousness. He shall minister judgment to the people in uprightness. The Lord also will be a refuge for the oppressed, a refuge in times of trouble. And they that know thy name will put their trust in thee. For thou, Lord, hast not forsaken thee that seek thee. Sing praises to the Lord, which dwelleth in Zion. Declare among the people his doings. When he maketh inquisition for blood, he remembereth them, he forgetteth not the cry of the humble. Have mercy upon me, O Lord. Consider my trouble for which I suffered of them that hate me, that liftest me up from the gates of death, that I may shew forth all thy praise in the gates of the daughter of Zion. I will rejoice in thy salvation. The heathen are sunk down in the pit that they made, in the net which they hid is their own foot taken. The Lord is known by the judgment which he executeth. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands. Haggai Salah. The wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. For the needy shall not always be forgotten. The expectation of the poor shall not perish forever. Arise, O Lord, let not man prevail. Let the heathen be judged in thy sight. Put them in fear, O Lord, that the nations may know themselves to be but men. Salah Shalom. And God bless all of you. And I saw this on Wiki, Psalm 9. So it's the ninth Psalm of the Book of Psalms, beginning in English, King James Version. The topic of the Psalm is that the success of evil is only temporary, and in the end, the righteous will endure. So with that, I'm just going to leave you with a little tidbit of a documentary here. if you want to learn a little bit more about the eugenics movement and how it plays in to everything that we are still today, even though it's not called as such, and how it's played into biological uh, terror. And even though it's horrible, it's been able to somehow morph into something that is beneficial, that can help us, right? So where do we draw the line? And once again, is it about the people who are running these establishments? Or are these people, do they have no soul? Or are these some of the people who were born in a situation where they were not raised or reared, or even in some terms that they like to use, bred properly, right? Because they've had so much trauma. All of that to say, at the end of the day, it takes courage. Even the bad people out there have enough, even though we say they're cowards, they're courageous still to do the atrocities that we see happening still to today.
Eugenics was widely accepted in the United States as solid science among the country's top psychologists, scientists, politicians, and social thinkers. During this first Gilded Age, it was the creation of the gene concept itself that ignited what became a powerful eugenics movement. So one reason that the eugenics movement was so influential at the time was because it provided a scientific solution, or a supposedly scientific solution, to a political problem. The Gilded Age was the first time in American history in which you had people sitting on top of the entire economy, vast fortunes made on the backs of average people. At the same time, a new wave of immigrants coming into this country with nothing. And our cities became fitted slums in contrast to the extraordinary wealth that the robber barons, as we call them, were enjoying. We were in danger of losing our economy and our democracy.
People forget, in 1900, there was no middle class in America. In 1900, there was no weekend in America. There's not one single paid holiday. We had this extreme laissez-faire social Darwinist reality, and the vast majority of Americans were fighting to change it.
People took to the streets, held massive general strikes, demanded better living and working conditions, and an end to laissez-faire, unregulated capitalism. If that's the explanation, then the true way to fix that is to pay higher wages and to give people a better environment in which to live. And it was clear which explanation would be preferable to the captains of capitalist industry in the early 20th century, and that is the biological explanation. The wealthiest families in the country provided millions in research funding to scientists in an attempt to prove that social problems were primarily a result of defective genetics. At the prestigious Cold Spring Harbor Laboratory in New York, Harry Laughlin, an animal breeder, directed the eugenics record office. Stronger, just as species become stronger when their weakest members die off and their strongest members.
Be careful out there. That arm is unstable. Not sure how long it's gonna hold.